What's up everybody, this is Ambro with AMBG, and today we're going to talk about the highly anticipated open world zombie apocalypse parkour extravaganza that is Dying Light 2 Stay Human. Dying Light 2 Stay Human is out on December 7th, 2021 for the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S for the retail price of $59.99 US. As always, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to support the channel further and see more content like this, consider subscribing. It helps out the channel a lot and I would really appreciate it. Running, jumping, drop kicking, sliding, gliding, curb stomping, wall running, swinging, sneaking, climbing, shooting, well, what can't you do? In this video, we're going to go over everything that we know so far about Dying Light 2, and some of the additions to the already amazing gameplay that made Dying Light 1 so good. For the uninitiated, Dying Light, the original, is an open-world parkour runner, melee-based zombie game. There is a deadly viral outbreak that has caused a majority of the world's population to turn into, well, you guessed it, zombies. You play as generic hero number 1, and you get airdropped into a quarantine city. Now, Dying Light 1 came out on January 27, 2015, and if you remember from that time period, which it's only 6 years ago, but it feels like it was a lot shorter, that zombies were all the rage. I mean, you had zombie movies like World War Z come out just a year or two before that. In the few years leading up to 2015, you had games like Dead Rising, Dead Island, DayZ, H1Z1, The Last of Us, Left 4 Dead, Walking Dead. Anyway, you get my point. Entertainment was flooded with zombie material, and frankly, it always will be. So for the developer Techland to come out and make yet another zombie game, because by the way, they also developed the Dead Island franchise, it was almost like a, oh my god, alright, let's see how this one turns out. But what they ultimately pulled off was absolutely astounding. To come out with a zombie game in an otherwise flooded market, and be as commercially successful as they were, was no short feat. What made Dying Light so good was the combination of some amazing gameplay elements, from the weapon crafting to the general sense of danger, the day-night cycle with the trade-offs for doing activities in each one, the parkour, and the general sense of tension. Dying Light is a spooky game. The sensation when the sun is about to set and you scramble to get back to your base and you look behind you and you see that you're getting chased, chef's kiss. It's just pure horror and chaos, and I love it. The parkour was also a defining gameplay element of the game. It was kind of like a combination of Mirror's Edge and Assassin's Creed, with the way that you climb, grab, and jump, and do all sorts of acrobatics to navigate the map. Another cool feature being that the map was pretty big, and as you ran around the city, you developed all these routes to navigate, and it just felt super satisfying because the more that you played, the more that it felt like your city. The day-night cycle was also really cool. While the night is way more dangerous with the special infected that could pursue you if provoked, there was a trade-off. You would earn double XP for performing actions during the nighttime. Kills got you double XP for the combat skill tree, and parkour got you double XP for the agility skill tree. The risk versus reward system that was in place gave you a great incentive to do all of these activities at night. All of this led up to an incredibly engaging experience that was also supported up until last year. That's right, Dying Light 1 was receiving updates and DLC from the developer Techland up until 2020. That's basically unheard of in this day and age in the gaming industry. I know some devs do it, but this is just such a cool thing, and a huge reason why the hype for Dying Light 2 has been so high. So a lot of the things that I just mentioned are present in the sequel, but I want to talk about what they've really gone to expand on that. So let's jump into what we know about Dying Light 2 Stay Human. Let's start with the story, because in my opinion, this was something that was lacking a bit in Dying Light the original, at least in the base game. Dying Light 2 takes place 15 years after the original, so 15 years after the outbreak of the Haran virus, and you play as Aiden Caldwell, an outsider trying to untangle a mystery from his past. You find your way into this unnamed city. At some point, you're falling victim to the infection and you're looking for a cure. Yeah, it's a pretty generic setup, but the way the game is laid out, I do think it's going to lead to some interesting results, which we'll get to. There are 3 factions that are struggling for control of the city. And I'm going to read this word for word from the trailer, so just bear with me. So you have 3 factions. You have the survivors that pride themselves on being able to adapt to any circumstances and cobble up safe zones almost everywhere. Then you have the peacekeepers, who are loyal soldiers who want to impose their version of law and order and trample all on their path. Then you have the renegades, who are ex-prisoners serving their ruthless colonel, seeking to become the sole rulers of the city. Now, beyond those three main factions, you also have a few other parties that are kind of throughout the city. You have bandits, outlaws, and thugs that simply just can't be reasoned with, and they just cause general chaos in the city as a whole. Then you have Night Runners, which you actually saw a big focus on that in the trailer, and who the Night Runners are, they're veterans who actually help pedestrians. The way they talked about it in the trailer, they say that you don't really know if you can trust them, but I'm paraphrasing here, and they said, you know, in a city, in a setting as dangerous as this, you may have to place some unearned trust in people in order to survive, and I think that's really cool. So it's almost like there's three main factions and then two kind of like unofficial factions, and I think that's a great setup. It's definitely a nice change up from Dying Light 1. But what this also leads to in terms of the gameplay is the choices that you make throughout the story. So back in 2019, when Techland showed off that, it was like a 20-minute demo, they showed how making decisions can literally change the landscape of your playthrough. Choices you make in the game's story can not only change the outcome of the story, but open up entirely new parts of the map. Opening up these new parts of the map gives you new quests and things to investigate. But also apparently there are new parkour moves unique to those sections of the map, which I think is really cool. That's at least what we're told. Speaking of parkour moves, there are more than double the amount of parkour moves that were in the first game, which at the time of Dying Light 1 was really cool. First-person parkour really wasn't a thing that was too explored at that time. Yeah, you had Mirror's Edge, and you've had games in the past like Metroid and Doom do it. It just wasn't a huge genre at the time. But seeing recent demos and trailers for the game, you get this sense of mobility that you just didn't have in Dying Light, the original. Parkour certainly isn't new, but the addition of new moves is really cool and always welcome. Speaking of new moves, there's been a big emphasis on the new grappling hook. The grappling hook does have a bit of history, so let's just back up for a minute here. So before you break out your pitchforks and your torches, yes, the grappling hook was in Dying Light 1. But a kind of little fun fact is that apparently the grappling hook was a coding mistake on the developer side. They were actually testing an algorithm to detect ledges, and for some reason it led to being able to teleport from ledge to ledge. The developer ended up making some changes to it and ended up making it in the game, obviously, but it did, in my opinion, make it way too easy. It kind of made all of the free running pointless, which was such a huge draw to the game. Now, you don't get it until pretty late in the game, but it was a little bit of a game breaker. Now, in Dying Light 2, you will see a balancing of the grappling hook, but I think the cooler part of the grappling hook is the use of it to essentially combo into offensive attacks. So piggybacking off of the new parkour moves, having all these new moves leads to more fluid animations and animation blending. This also carries over to using the grappling hook. So just picture this for a second. You slide under a table, you vault over a zombie, you wall run, jump side to side, and then into the grappling hook, and then you slam the ground with some really cool modded weapon that you have and kill all of your enemies. I honestly just got chills explaining that sequence. It sounds like it's just going to be so badass to do. Speaking of weapons, modded weapons make a return, which isn't surprising. It's been a common trope in basically all zombie games, but Dying Light always made the modding feel special with the weapon degradation because every modded weapon felt like your baby. You wanted to use it, you also never wanted to break it. Since we're on the topic of some additions to the gameplay in comparison to Dying Light 1, let's continue with that. I mentioned it before when I talked about the demo from 2019. You know that part where Aiden turns on the water pumps and drains out this whole new section from the city? From what we're told, there are 7 unique regions to the map. Each environment has new enemies and new parkour moves needed to navigate through the area. Now, it's unclear whether you can unlock all 7 as you progress the story, or if certain areas will be locked, again based on the narrative choices that you make. Speaking of which, the map is supposedly 4 times bigger than Dying Light 1, which is pretty crazy because Dying Light 1 had a pretty sizable map. It obviously wasn't as big as something like Skyrim or Breath of the Wild, but for an Xbox 360 era map, considering the hardware that they were working on, it was decently big. But bigger isn't always better. But what I do like to see is the focus on verticality, which I really like, and it seems like you're going to be able to use that grappling hook and all of your new moves in order to get up and down the big buildings that they have. I also just like that because when it comes to open world games, I tend to explore every single nook and cranny that I possibly can. I will look for every collectible, every bit of ammo, every Easter egg, it doesn't matter. Now, the last thing that I think is worth mentioning with the narrative decisions is that they aren't necessarily focused on a good decision or a bad decision. There is no morality system or aura system that you tend to see in a lot of games. According to the developers, the decisions are really supposed to make you think. The words that they used were, it's like a bad versus bad decision. You really don't like either decision, it kind of just comes down to the lesser of two evils. I like games that make you think, that make you consider your choices. Don't get me wrong, I love a good morality system in a game, but you know exactly what you're choosing in games like that. You know exactly which choice is good, and you know exactly what choice is bad. If you're doing evil playthrough, you're gonna pick the bad dialogue every time, and it doesn't exactly always feel like you're role-playing. But in a game like this, it's meant to be ambiguous, and I think that it will lead to really interesting outcomes for the story. We're told that there are multiple endings, so I'm really excited to see what happens. One more thing before we close out this video, I feel like we have to talk about the elephant in the room, and that are the concerns that the game has been in development hell. If you've been following the game's development, you've no doubt seen all of the stories. This does concern me to a pretty big degree. I know that there have been reports that are refuting the fact that it's in development hell, but when you have to say something like that, it's usually because it's true. Now, I'm still optimistic for it because I love Techland as a developer. All of their support on Dying Light 1 was enough for me to consider one of the best developers in the industry. But then again, we all thought a fellow Polish developer in CD Projekt Red was the golden boy, and well, look how that turned out. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for this video. There is still a lot of time between now and December, so there's going to be lots of news. I'm going to keep my eyes and ears open. Be sure to follow me on Twitter to stay up to date as I find things out. I'll leave a link to it down in the description. I would love to discuss this game with you further. What do you think from what you've seen so far? Is this going to be the defining open-world zombie game of the generation, or another Cyberpunk situation? If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to support the channel further and you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing. It really helps out the channel, and I would greatly appreciate it. I'll catch you next time.